Hello, everyone. Welcome to TSAM Digital. My name is Ana Luisa, and today I have the honor of welcoming Dr. John Holzman, founder and managing partner of John C. Holzman Enterprises, a global political risk firm, and he's also a life member of the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations. John has advised many world-renowned organizations such as NATO and the European Parliament, as well as many globally systemic important banks. Welcome, John.
Ana Luisa, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. So, John, before we get started, I wanted to sort of check with you. I understand, and is this correct, that you uniquely called the Russian invasion 3 months before it happened within a day?
We did. And again, I think one of the reasons that we got this right, and you should judge, all of you, any political risk outfit by its call record. And obviously, like baseball, there's luck involved. This is an art and not a science. But our call record is about 80%, and on the big stuff, higher, meaning we add value. The monkey gets 50. Some of my competitors actually have below 50, incredibly enough. But at 80, I think that, again, the best baseball team tends to win the World Series. And the reason we got this call right was we understood three basic pots that need to be put together: the macroeconomics of what's going on, the geopolitics of what's going on, and the military strategy of what's going on. And there are plenty of experts who are pretty good in each of those areas. But unless you put all that together in a holistic way, it's like dots on a pointillist painting. I don't care what the dots look like. I want to take a step back and say that's a Seurat painting of a lady. If you can do that, then you've got a ball game. And we put the dots together in late November, saying that Putin would invade toward the end of February, and why. The main reason was military, actually, that the ground gets soft. Spring comes to Ukraine. And the Russians are adept at moving heavy armor, at moving tanks and artillery. And if the ground gets mushy, you can't move tanks and heavy artillery. So he had to use it or lose it. Basically, he had to go at the end of February or wait sometime until about May. He'd have to wait for the ground to dry out again. And our military guys made this clear to the political guys and the economic guys. And we all said, by golly, you're right. And so this is a case where the weather actually made the political risk, and Putin chose, our political guys said, to use it rather than lose it.
Well, absolutely. And it's interesting. I wanted to kind of kick off with your predictions for how the Russo-Ukrainian conflict might end or, might develop.
Well, Ana Luisa, that's the $64,000 question. And the answer is that I still think Putin wins, but now he wins ugly. The original plan was a blitzkrieg drive to take the cities of Ukraine, so demoralize the Ukrainian populace and their leadership that Zelensky slinks away into exile with the leadership, that the Ukrainian people say, well, yeah, we can put up with this. I mean, our cities haven't been bombed. It wasn't that bad. The Russians have reestablished order, and that Ukraine becomes another Soviet or another Russian satellite like Belarus, like Azerbaijan and Armenia, and like Tartus in Syria, the naval base in Syria. What Putin wants is the old czarist dream of strategic depth. He wants a bunch of states in front of him that if Russia is ever invaded, people have to go through them, trading time for land. This has been the Russian playbook from Charles XII in the 18th century, Napoleon in the 19th, and the Kaiser and Hitler in the 20th century. And you trade land for time. Well, he's complained recently, if Ukraine isn't on our side and you launch a hypersonic missile from Ukraine, it can hit Moscow in about 5 minutes. That's not strategic depth, and that's the old Russian playbook. And so he needs Ukraine on side, and that then leads to the military blitzkrieg. You go fast, you win, you discourage them, and then they switch sides, and you just install a puppet like Lukashenko is a puppet in Belarus. You install a Lukashenko in Ukraine, and everything's fine. Yeah, the West is annoyed, and there's sanctions, and in a few years, because of their addiction to your natural gas, you're fine. That didn't happen. That's already not happened. We already know that, because the blitzkrieg didn't work, and it didn't work for a couple basic reasons. One, it was way too complicated. There was a four-pronged assault. The Russians last launched a four-pronged assault in Berlin in 1945. It's been a long, long time since they've had to do anything that complicated. And Predictably, as Napoleon said, the best military plans are simple, are elegant, can be explained to the lowest private. You can explain what you're doing. This plan was incredibly complicated and didn't work as a result. The second thing that's happened is the Ukrainians have fought an awful lot harder than anybody thought they would. Encouraged by the slowdown, the Ukrainians, rather than be depressed, took heart and rallied around Zelensky, who looks pretty Winston Churchill-like this morning and has done brilliantly well. And we've got little old ladies making Molotov cocktails in the basement. I mean, the entire population has mobilized in a way the Russians certainly didn't count on. And then the third problem is that as these Russian tanks sit in these long lines, they break down. They run out of fuel. Anybody who's seen the movie Saving Private Ryan gets this. If you hit the first tank, the lead tank, and it breaks down, the other tanks can't always just go around it. If they're in a city, you can't move around it, so you have a traffic jam. And that has made the whole thing go to a crawl. So the original plan to make the political risk work here has already failed. The blitzkrieg has failed. And instead, Putin now, as he said to Macron yesterday, has to double down. He has to win ugly, meaning indiscriminate bombing of civilians, meaning fighting either in cities or starving them, encircling them and waiting for them to starve out, or attacking them and having mass casualties. Yes, Putin will do that. Yes, he can still win. As Kherson in the south has shown us, he will win. But at what cost? He will win and make every Ukrainian an enemy of his forever. And a guerrilla war will inevitably come out of this once the Russians take the cities in western Ukraine, which has been part of the Habsburg Empire, as you know, Ana Luisa. And as a result, it already is tied to the West. The Europeans will bankroll this partisan movement. The United States will give them weapons, and they will bleed Putin out. He can take the territory, but he can't pacify the territory. And so with sanctions, with this guerrilla war, with the bankrolling of the West, in 3 years, Putin runs out of his monetary reserves of $600 billion. I mean, it's a lot of money, but still there is a finite time limit. Putin needs to win, and by win, pacify Ukraine. Have them all agree at some level to let him run the place. Ukraine is a bigger country than any Western European country. It's immense. And for him to pacify that in 3 years, my money's on the Ukrainians.
That's a very interesting take. And I wanted to also delve a little bit into what you foresee the Ukrainian invasion's impact, or how do you foresee the Ukrainian invasion's impact European and indeed world economies in the short and long term? Because I think a lot of our watchers are really, really worried and have no answer to this.
No, I mean, that's it. I mean, as you said, I work almost exclusively now with banks and hedge funds and some governmental work. And that's the question I'm being asked round the clock. And it's the right question. In the short run for Europe, there will be a hit. I mean, I would predict a recession. I think that's easy. There will be inflation. Already was out of control before all this. I'm with Larry Summers and not Paul Krugman. Always wrong about everything. Larry Summers usually right about things, though not Facebook. Pretty much everything else. And he said, look, I mean, the United States, particularly the Fed, was pouring gasoline on an open fire. If you increase public spending by 15% and the economy bounced back from COVID better than anyone thought, you'll have inflation. The math is the math. And the ECB was struggling to catch up, further behind in the cycle, but similar problem, if less of one. Well, now we have a commodity spike, which will continue. And it isn't just oil and natural gas. That's obvious and going to spike. It's over 110 today, I think was the Brent number. That will continue to go up. You'll have low growth. So you have the 1970s in the short run. You have stagflation, which is terrible for political risk. You have low growth, high inflation. And there's not much you can do. They can begin to walk this back. They can raise interest rates gradually. But interest rates, as we know, are a blunt instrument. You're going to have to hit now a moving target. I got to know Paul Volcker late in his life, which was a great pleasure for me. And really, Volcker and Reagan were the last people that tamed the beast of inflation. For 40 years, we haven't had to worry about this. We have to worry about this now. And there will be inflation, there will be recession, and then low growth for a while in the short run. But there is a positive but in this statement. But Europe has done more geostrategically in the last week than it's done in the last 20 years of my life. I mean, I woke up, it's like Christmas every day at the Holzman household. Every ask I made for the last 20 years has happened in a week. Suddenly, it's not impossible that Germany spends 2% of GDP on defense. Suddenly, it's not impossible that Nord Stream 2 doesn't happen, so Europe isn't crippled by a dependence on Russian natural gas. If Nord Stream 2 had gone into effect, it would have been 70%. That's like a drug addict going to a dealer and saying, double my dose. Of course, the dealer's going to say, yeah. But that has been stopped now by Robert Habeck, the Green Energy Minister in Germany. Fantastic. Scholz agreeing to 2%. The Germans agreeing to 100 billion euro to advance their weaponry. The Europeans agreeing to diversify their energy supply by building liquefied natural gas terminals to onshore gas from Qatar in the United States, to diversify the supply. So there are going to be 5 major suppliers to Europe: Qatar, the US, and then the old 3, Algeria, Norway, and Russia. That's fine. If Russia's 15 or 20% of the mix, so you can do what you like. So we have energy independence, strategic autonomy, military spending, and suddenly Europe agrees on what NATO is, as we were joking before this. All those existential navel-gazing conferences I had to go to for my sins are taken care of. We all know why NATO matters, and life insurance does matter. And yeah, you hate paying the premiums when times are good, but when times are bad, you're awfully glad you're a member. So on all these fronts, Europe has gotten its act together, geostrategically and politically, and there will be an upside. Europe always had a market every bit as big as China and the US. And for all that I'm a good Thatcherite, I think Europe is too regulated, too government heavy, too sclerotic, too bureaucratic, and I'll think that to the end of my days. But there are plenty of fantastic, vibrant, dynamic European companies that I work with. And now that they've been freed by actual geostrategic clarity for the first time in our life, watch Europe take off. And so the Europeans now can play in a league. They've arrested their decline and are now heading in an upward tilt. So in the medium to long term, Europe is a buy. They will take a hit. There will be a slight recession. There will be some stagflation for about 3 years out, and then watch it take off. I'm more bullish on Europe than I've been in my entire life.
That's really reassuring, I think. In a sense, it can be a little bit, you can feel a bit powerless. And I think I speak for a lot of people saying this. You know, in the face of such a huge conflict, you just don't really know what you can do. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think can still be done by major players on the stage in order to minimize the impact of the conflict to economies and to international relations?
Well, let me start with the easy part, which is the international relations part there. I mean, keep doing what we're doing. It's horrible to watch, horrendous to watch the suffering of the Ukrainian people. And as a risk analyst, you feel it in the morning. I shake my head and then I put my risk hat on and get to work analyzing. And I think that's what people at banks, hedge funds, and governments need to do. You have to allow your humanity to be part of that. It's good that we have humanity. It's good that we have the rights and beliefs that we do. It's not an impediment. It's why we're strong. And we should never lose sight of that. Any analyst I'm an ethical realist and wrote a book called Ethical Realism. Any analyst that's a Machiavellian realist, Machiavelli got a lot wrong. I mean, he got Cesare Borgia wrong as opposed to Pope Julius. I mean, just because you're dispassionate and don't care about things doesn't mean you're smarter than the rest of us. It's important to say that. So it's important to, keep faith with your humanity. But on the other hand, the strategy in place is a good one by the West. You contain the conflict. You help the Ukrainians when the towns are taken. You help them organize a resistance. Obviously, from World War II, they have a great tradition of partisan warfare where they fought very bravely against Hitler. The western part of the country is fertile ground. Another book I wrote was about Lawrence of Arabia, and he said famously, if I have 2% of the people in a guerrilla war and the other 98% are sympathetic to me, we'll win. And certainly Western Ukraine is going to be sympathetic to the Zelensky government. I think that I'm sure of. And so there's fertile ground to win. We have to keep our eyes, not immediately, it will take years, but within a period of about 3 years, Putin runs out of money. The body bags come home to Russia. The Siloviki, the hard men around Putin, can't get out to their yachts, can't go to London to go hang out. And suddenly life doesn't look so good. And then Putin has his Shakespearean moment. The people around the throne start saying, maybe I should be king. Maybe Putin's ruining the country. And that's what we're playing for here. But it is a reasonable political risk bet. So we need to be calm and keep to this longer term geostrategy and be thrilled that Europe's with the program. Europe has acted more quickly and more decisively in the last week than they have in the last 20 years by far. So I'm heartened by what I see out there. In terms of investment, Without specifics, obviously in the short run, in any volatility, a flight to safety makes sense in the short run to guard on this, but also start thinking about this medium term I'm talking about, because I think Europe across the board is a buy in 3 years. A Europe with the market share that it already has, that successfully sees off Putin, that has a real military, because up to now only France has a full spectrum military. If Germany comes on board and others follow, and one assumes others like Italy will, comes on board, suddenly Europe has a military, a geostrategy, and it's always had a market, meaning it's a great power. Those are the attributes of a great power. And Europe plays in the top rung, finally, not through talking, not through wishful thinking, which has been the case up to now, but in reality, it plays in a way that only the Chinese and the Americans do. So Europe in the medium term is a buy. So protect the portfolio now, absolutely. Stagflation is coming, but in the medium run, Europe is a huge buy.
I'm really glad to hear these reassuring words coming from you. I really hope our watchers as well will appreciate it. And lastly, wanted to ask, do you have any words of wisdom for financial institutions and policymakers out there?
Well, I mean, the first thing is let's start with the hard part this time, which is financial institutions. It's always the more interesting bit for me. Again, I'm a good private sector Thatcherite. The reality is that looking for value out there means two things right now. I mean, America is safe enough and will do fine. Asia has a lot more political risk, but a lot more reward. I mean, that's why my firm spends more and more time doing Asia. It's where all the risk and all the reward are. We like both those things. You know, we're good at mitigating risk and we're good at looking for opportunities. But I think now, again, I think that the underwritten story of the whole crisis is Europe being now an opportunity. So long we've seen Europe as sclerotic, divided, militarily impotent, geostrategically confused. And I bet against it for 20 years, and correctly so. That certainly didn't hurt my call record any. But you have to look for change. And analysts, financial analysts like risk analysts, have to look for change. You look at trajectories and you look at change. The trajectory for Europe is now up for the first time in a generation. And so looking for medium run opportunities where you have these research departments and time to find them, plenty of dynamic European companies, there always have been, but now you have a much more favorable geostrategic environment going forward. So medium to long run, Europe is a buy. And we're going to have to start hiring European analysts again, which is not something we've done in a long time. I mean, I'm it at the firm because that's my passion. And I think this is a wonderful thing. So even in every crisis, what it does is it clarifies. It's like a bolt of lightning that suddenly makes the landscape clear. And the landscape always has changed then, but you have to wait for that bolt. We're right at that moment of lightning. And so it's a wonderful time to talk. And paradoxically, see Europe not as a laggard, but as a buy.
That's wonderful to hear, John. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been really wonderful talking to you. And I wanted to say for anyone who's watching, if you'd like to hear more from John's expertise on political risk, the good news is you can. You can subscribe to his Substack site, johnholzman.substack.com. There's a link in the description of this video. And do keep in touch and follow John because he has just wonderful, endless pool of insight for you. Thank you, John.
Louisa, thank you so much. It's been great fun doing this with you.
Thank you.